In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome back to another Friday, and we are on chapter 31, Surah Al Qiyamah, which means the resurrection or raising of the dead. This is a slightly long chapter, long in comparison to what we have previously reviewed, but not long in comparison to other chapters in the Quran. This is 40 verses, and I'll go through them quickly because the chapter alone is enough to get me worried about some of the things that will happen on the day of judgment, but also because, in essence of time, I want to discuss one or two things that are covered here. So, in terms of arrangement, it's chapter number 75. So, it's in the last two sections of the Quran. But in terms of revelation, it's chapter 31, as we've been using Tanzil.net or Noldeke or a couple of other sources to arrange this series that I do. So, last week we talked about the striking hour of the day of judgment, and then this will happen and that will happen. And now it's being carried forward. So look at what you've seen. You've seen a lot of emphasis on being a good person, being kind to the weak, to the poor, to the orphans. We've seen all of that. And then the other theme was always uh, be fearful of God's wrath. God is magnificent, God is omnipotent, all these things. Um, and now you'll start seeing other factions coming out. But this one focuses on that day of judgment that was hinted in the last chapter, but also hinted before. Like, this is the day of judgment and this is the situation. So now this is officially Surah Al Qiyamah. Qiyamah, the resurrection of that day, is the exact term in Arabic. So it says, in the name of God, most gracious, the most merciful, I swear by the day of resurrection, and I swear by the self-reproaching person, a believer, someone who's reflective and reproaches himself. Does man, a disbelieving man, think that we shall not assemble his bones? See, this is the thing about God's poetry and God's writing. It can be, what's the word? Magnificent is not the word, but huge in scale. It could be massive, but it can also be really sharp. Imagine saying this to someone. Does that person think we shall not assemble his bones? Wow, sounds like something the Godfather might say. Sounds like something that he'll say, but it's not. This is in the Quran. Chapter number 75, verse number 3. Does man, a disbeliever, think that we shall not assemble his bones? Now, if you were reading this out of context, which a lot of critics do, you can pick and choose, not just of the Quran or anything, of anything. If you're criticizing something, if you see the full story or the context, your opinion changes to in comparison to you just picking and choosing. But if you picked this verse out, it sounds incredibly intense, incredibly violent, incredibly sharp. Does man think that we shall not assemble his bones? Wow, that's heavy. But let's read it in context. So it says, I swear by the day of resurrection, and I swear by the self reproaching person, which means a believer. Does the disbelieving man think that we shall not assemble his bones? Yes, we are able to put together in perfect order the tips of his fingers. And it says in the footnote, each human being has his or her own special fingerprints. We know that. Not resembling anyone else, indicating that our Lord is the most superior creator of everything. True. So we know the fingertip thing. Fingerprints should be the word, shouldn't it? Yeah, it says fingerprints, exactly. So we know they're unique, just like your DNA sequence is unique to you and no one else unless you are cloned. But because of that, nay, man denies resurrection and reckoning, so he desires to continue committing sins. Guilty, yes, God, I don't deny it, but maybe I forget it, as many of us do. So it may not be voluntarily rejecting something or neglecting, but we're still doing it. He asks, when will be this day of resurrection? So, when the sight shall be dazed, and the moon will be eclipsed, and the sun and moon will be joined together by going one into the other, or folded up, or deprived of their light. And it says in the footnote narrated by Abu Huraira that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, the sun and the moon will be folded up, or joined together, or deprived of their light on the day of resurrection. This is from Sahih al-Bukhari 4:3200. I've seen Avatar, I've seen Contact, I've seen Solaris, I've seen Interstellar, I've seen all of Star Wars, I've seen Star Trek, anything you can imagine with the sun and the moon and the universe. I have never seen human beings formulate words where they say the sun and the moon will be folded up or joined together. This, or deprived of their light, I understand. I can imagine that. That's after a supernova, for example, the light is gone. But folded up, the sun is never something that I consider can be folded up. But it could also mean it is an argument of scales. I am 5'8". The sun is probably infinity foot 50. Well, it's not, but it's huge. It's so many times larger than the earth. So I can't imagine something that large being folded up, or one going into the other. But this is the way God writes in the Quran, but also in all the other books. If you read books from other religions, it can be grand, but all of a sudden it's sharp, and it makes you think about things like, whoa, I didn't think the sun could be folded up. What does that even mean? How do you fold up a sphere? Well, we'll see on the day of resurrection, I'm guessing. And the sun and the moon will be joined together by going one into the other, or folded up, or deprived of the light. On that day, man will say, where is the refuge to flee? No, there is no refuge. Unto your Lord alone will be the place of rest that day. On that day, man will be informed of what he sent forward of his evil or good deeds, and what he left behind of his evil and good tradition. So, what you have done and what you have left behind. Fair enough. Nay, man will be a witness against himself, as his body parts, skin, hands, legs, will speak about his deeds. Now, this is a theme in Islam, in the Quran, and I'll come back to it at the end. But this is a very important theme. Though he may put forth his excuses to cover his evil deeds, like we do today, may not be evil deeds or good. Well, we never give excuses for good deeds. Do we give excuses or rationales? We give reasoning. Why did you give charity to that person? Oh, well, I wanted them to not go hungry. It's not an excuse. It's never like, oh, well, I had money and I just had to get rid of it. It's never an excuse. It's always a reasoning. But for evil deeds or bad deeds, or deeds that we believe, either through social conditioning or through conscience or through biological instinct, when we know those things are wrong, then we give excuses for them. Though he may put forth his excuses to cover his evil deeds, move not your tongue concerning the Quran, O Muhammad, to make haste therewith. It is for us to collect it and to give you the ability to recite it. So this is about the use of the tongue. And when we have recited it to you, O Muhammad, through Gabriel, then follow its recitation. So this is a big thing which you may see in Hinduism, not so much in Christianity, although Christianity has a lot of hymns and gospel music. But in Islam, the book can be read, but if you ever attend a prayer, five of which happen at least 5 of which happen every single day, you'll see that in some of the prayers, when the sun isn't out and it's not Friday or it's not Eid, they're reciting it. They're not reading the Quran, they recite it. It has what Jordan Peterson calls a melodic element to it, or a tune to it, or a way that sounds like chanting or singing. It has that to it. So the recitation is a big thing. And when we have recited it to you, O Muhammad, through Gabriel, then follow its recitation. Then it is for us to make it clear to you. And by us, God means God. And we can always discuss whether it's me or us or we. That's a useless discussion as far as I'm concerned. What matters here is that God is saying It is up to God to make the Quran clear to you. Not as you think that you, mankind, will not be resurrected and recompensed for your deeds, but you, men, love the present life of this world and neglect the hereafter. Yes, this is a theme that we see in a lot of religions, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it. I wish I could tell you there's nothing wrong with it, but obviously, if it is in every book that you're neglecting the hereafter, there's something wrong with it. And I think the primary thing that's wrong with it is that life is transient, life is ephemeral, life is fleeting. So to be focused on something that is fleeting, to be focused purely on something that is fleeting, is not a great long-term strategy. I would make that argument. But obviously, we can have a debate about it. Some faces that day shall be Nadira, shining and radiant, looking at their Lord. Let's hope I'm one of them. And some faces that day will be Basira, dark, gloomy, frowning, and sad, thinking that some calamity is about to fall on them. Nay, when the soul reaches to the collarbone, up to the throat in its exit, it will be said, who can cure him and save him from death? When the soul reaches to the collarbone, up to the throat in its exit. Can you imagine that? So I wonder whether solar plexus, which is around your abdomen, has something to do with soul or the sun. I don't know. I don't know the science behind that or the linguistics. But the soul is being pulled out. Ooh. And it will be said, who can cure him and save him from death? And he, the dying person, will conclude that it was the time of parting, death. And one leg will be joined with another leg, shrouded. And it says in the footnote, or it may mean hardship and distress will be joined with another hardship and distress. And that hardship and distress is about what is going to happen to that person in the hereafter. But the way it's been written in the Quran is that one leg will be joined with another leg, and maybe it's increasing hardship. The drive will be on that day to your Lord. So you're moving in that direction. So he, the disbeliever, neither believed in this Quran and in the message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, nor prayed. So he didn't believe in the book and he didn't follow the basic prayer. But on the contrary, he denied this Quran and the message of Muhammad and turned away. Many Muslims, many people do it. They turn away from the faith. Okay? Then he walked in conceit, full of pride, to his family, admiring himself. Okay? Woe to you, O man, O disbeliever, and then again, woe to you. And the next verse, again, woe to you, O man, disbeliever, and then again, woe to you. Ooh, that's 4 woes. Does man think that he will be left neglected without being punished or rewarded for the obligatory duties enjoined by his Lord on him? Was he not a nutfa? And we've discussed this term before, which means was he not a mixed drop of male and female sexual discharge, emitted, poured forth? Then he became an alaqa, which means a clot, so clot of congealed blood. Then God shaped and fashioned him in due proportion and made of him 2 sexes, male and female. Is not he, God who does that, able to give life to the dead? Yes, he is able to do all things. This is the end of the chapter. So there's an imagery of the day of resurrection. There's explanations about it. Then it talks about the faces of people, talks about the disbelievers, talks about the disbelievers, talks about that God took you from a mixture of sexual discharge into a clot and into what you are today. Scientifically speaking, if you remove the term God, most scientists, if not all, would agree, yes, male and female discharge came together, formed a, what is it, zygote. It became at conception and became what you are today. It's a process. You put God in, then that's religion, and that's what we're discussing. So a lot of reference has been given back and forth to that, and talks about the sun, and there's a lot of imagery which God does. But I want to talk about verse number 14. Man will be a witness. Nay, man will be a witness against himself. as his body parts will speak about his deeds. Now, this is a common theme in Islam, that it says on the day of judgment, you will not be able to make the excuses you make today. So, we are used to, especially someone like me who's somewhat erudite and astute at having a conversation, I tend to rationalize and I tend to trivialize and I tend to make arguments for my beliefs or positions on something, and I can make a case. At most times, it's a persuasive case. So I end up either convincing my friends or colleagues or professors or whoever has worked for me into a direction that I'm on the right path or I'm saying something correct, uh, even more so about their lives and about mine. So I've been able to do that through my tongue, through this connection, through communication, which I've been used to for the last 35 years. On that day, I will not have that instrument at my disposal. So when I will be asked, why did you commit certain sin? I wouldn't be able to say, well, God, you know what happened that day? It was raining and I had to do this. I wouldn't be able to do that. Instead, I will be stuck with watching my hands say, God, He made us do this. And my tongue would say, He made me say those words. And my eyes would say, He turned us in that direction, and stare here, because His desire was this. I would not be my own lawyer. My body would speak. Can you imagine? That is the imagery. So the sun will be folded, fair enough, and the disbelievers and the believers and all of that, fair enough. But imagine that parts of you are speaking. For example, if with this finger I've hurt somebody, imagine I have a Vulcan death grip and I gripped somebody and cut off their air supply. These fingers will speak and they'll say, we were told, or we were commanded, or we were forced to inflict pain on someone else. I wouldn't be able to defend my decisions because the body does not give rationale. It does not give reasoning. It does not say, well, we kicked that person because he was in our way. The body will say, I was told to kick that person who was in our way. And that is not a reasoning, that is just a fact. And I would be defenseless. I would be indefensible because the communication, the lawyer in my head, which I've employed for the last 35 years, will not be on my side anymore. Imagine that. And then you say, oh, fair enough, I don't believe in the day of judgment. Great. I don't believe in a religion. Great. I don't believe in God. Good for you. But here I'm talking about anyone who's interested in this religion and this book and this perspective. So if you have a different belief, I respect it. Good for you. Happy to engage in debates, good faith debates, bad faith debates. We can have conversations and we don't have to reach any agreements at all. But this is what the Quran says. But let's for one moment assume that this book is correct and this book is true. This is for all the disbelievers or people who are not Muslims. Let's assume this argument is correct. Is this something that you've ever imagined? I really haven't. And I've grown up a Muslim, so I've been aware of this theme, this thought in the Quran, that on the day of judgment, parts of my body will speak. And it scares me. I don't get scared easily. All of you who know me know that I'm a rationalist. I don't get scared very easily. I tend to rationalize. But when I read things like this, and when God expresses through such chapters with such clarity and such sharp words and poetry, it scares me. And then I start thinking, let's assume this is true. This is for the 8 billion of us, not the 2 billion Muslims, but the 8 billion of us, nearly 2 billion, I'd say. This is for the 8 billion of us. Let's assume this is true. Then you say, okay, let's assume on the day of judgment, parts of my body will speak, and I won't be able to defend my actions. What can I do about this now? So you say, you know what? If my eyes are going to speak, and tell on the day of judgment, tell all the wrong that I've seen by choice, then maybe I can start controlling my eyes. If you reflect upon this and say, on the day of judgment, my tongue is going to speak, and my tongue is going to say, my tongue, I'm not going to speak, my tongue itself will say, well, I was moved in this manner to communicate these words, and my tongue will speak. Maybe I can start focusing on my tongue. If on the day of judgment you fear that your hands will speak, that these hands have killed, stolen, cheated, destroyed, maybe I can start focusing on what I do with my hands. And if that is an approach that one can take, then you are not only in better stead religiously, but also as a person. So, as a person, I don't know anyone who has ruined personal and professional relationships by not saying the wrong word. It's either not saying the right word, but it's mostly saying the wrong word. You know what I mean? So if you scream at your boss in front of the board of directors, you've said something wrong and you will lose your job. If you vilify your spouse verbally, or verbal abuse or harassment, it could lead to the end of your marriage. So saying the wrong things is infinitely worse than not saying the right thing. There is a gradation. I'm not saying that not saying the right thing is perfect. I'm saying in a hierarchy, the worst thing in terms of what you can express verbally is saying the wrong thing. And they could be vitriolic, they could be hurtful, offensive, however you want to measure that. Not saying the right thing comes later. But if you are mindful of what you are saying, then more often than not, you will say nothing rather than say anything. The same applies to your eyes, the same applies to all your senses, same applies to your hands. If I have a habit of stealing, start with chocolates, now you're stealing money from the bank, or you're stealing people's cars or whatever, and you say, you know what? My hands will speak for me on the day of judgment. Maybe I should be mindful of this. And you decide to be mindful of it. Chances are that you may not steal as much anymore. Maybe you stop doing other things that may be beneficial to you. But the mitigation is you stop doing the dangerous thing more and you reduce the non-dangerous things a little. And then when it's under your control, you can do more. So in Hinduism, in Buddhism, or in any religion which practices meditation, it is all about the stillness of the mind, the center of the soul, where it's moving, and then you control it, you leave it free, and you find a center, and it finds a center like this, and then it stays. So and the same goes with discipline in the gym. The same goes with discipline in life. When you are mindful of your actions, you stop doing the dangerous things more and you reduce the non-dangerous things a little. So if you say, well, if I am watching every action I do, then maybe I won't do this. No, your argument falls flat. Empirically and even logically, it falls flat. So let's not come back with that argument. Let's focus on this. Chapter number 75, verse number 14. Man will be a witness against himself, as his body parts will speak about his deeds. So my message today is just this. Let's assume for a moment that that's true, that it could happen. And if you could pick one body part, just one, to be mindful of and say, you know what? I'm going to control my eyes. I'm going to control my tongue. I'm going to control what's between my legs. I'm going to control my hands. If you could do that, I promise you, this is a lesson from the Quran that applies to everyone, and it will better everyone and everything you do. So instead of there's a lot of imagery and there's a lot of metaphors about this, but take the guns out of the child's hand and put a book in it. So what you're using your hands for is something that benefits you and the rest of the world rather than killing everyone, which probably doesn't benefit anyone. So try to focus, and this would be the last thing I say, try to focus on one sense of your body. One sense, whether you see, hear, breathe, speak, act upon. Try to focus on that one sense and see, let me be mindful of it for a week. A week is just 168 hours. It's nothing. Just focus on that 1 week of self-control, of that one sense. And if you falter in the middle, fair enough. No problem. Try again tomorrow. But just try to be mindful of that. And let's see how that goes. I'm going to stop here because I'm already over 25 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful Friday, wonderful weekend. And I shall see you